just 35. You don't just raise two kids and take out your trash.
I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV Velocities in Music, the best kept secret in music reviews. Let's cut it down to brass tacks, Tom.
All right.
We like the album we're reviewing today. This was a request. Kil Moon. Benji, the sixth record from Kil Moon. Tom, who is Kil Moon?
Kil Moon is fronted by a guy named Mark, and I know I'm going to butcher his last name, Kozelek?
Kozelek?
I'm sorry, guys. This is the pain of having to pronounce things when you review it.
It's the pain of growing up in a cornfield.
That's true. We don't know how to talk, right? But he was actually the front man's kind of singer-songwriter guitarist for a really cool band in the 90s called Red House Painters. They actually kind of went into the early 2000s as well and then dissolved a bit. But this Kil Moon is kind of more the more solo project of Mark. And there are definitely some similarities with Red House Painters, just in kind of the somber approach to the sound and the songwriting. Red House Painters was still a little bit more fleshed out. This is a little bit more stripped down, a little bit more raw, and even particularly this album. I mean, not just Kil Moon in general, but even Benji compared to the rest of Kil Moon's material. I mean, wow, like it doesn't get much more raw than this.
And the lyrics on this album, I think, are much more like personal and introverted and introspective than on previous records.
And the lyrics are really the lyrics are really the key to this album.
Yeah,
and we're gonna dive right into that. But I figure, before we get to that monster of the lyrics, let's talk a little bit more about the sound, because I don't really think that it's too much to describe. It's mostly focused on acoustic guitar
and Mark's vocals.
Yeah, exactly.
And sometimes like the guys who are in Kil Moon do some backing vocals and stuff, which gives it a nice color to it.
Yeah, a lot of cool vocal layers.
Yeah, and every once in a while, some of the tracks, I think it's like track 4 or 5 before you actually hear drums come in. There's a couple tracks in there with drums, and then really this is an acoustic album. Only the last track, which is added onto the album at the very end of him recording Benji, Ben's My Friend, adds a little bit of like cool saxophone
and some bass,
piano.
And it almost has this like Marvin Gaye meets Destroyer kind of vibe.
Yeah, and at first I didn't like that. I'll be perfectly honest. Like, I thought that it just didn't fit in with the rest of the album. But actually, now that I've kind of listened to this album way too many times, I feel like it actually does kind of sum up the album nice, especially ending it on a more optimistic note, as you told me.
Yeah. So if we're done with the sound, then let's just jump right into the lyrics.
Let's do it.
Because that is what this album's all about. And what's interesting is, if you've ever watched this show before, you know that Jake and I aren't usually all about albums that are focusing on lyrics.
No.
I feel most of the time that they can kind of supplement a good listen, but that if they're too much the focus, then just go read some poetry or something. But
this is a
different beast altogether, because it's all about the mood he's creating in telling these stories. And what's interesting about his approach is that his lyricism, his approach to constructing these stories isn't necessarily like overtly poetic.
No, not at all.
He's not using a lot of flowery language. He's just being very straightforward. He is telling you a story as if he was sitting next to you at a campfire, relating some of these parts of his life to you. I mean, he's not going, all Walt Whitman on you. He's just being very human, and it makes it so easy to relate to.
Right, but in how he constructs the songs, I think track 10, Michaeline, is a great example. Michaeline tells 3 different stories within the same track. There's a verse, and then kind of a very simplistic chorus, but the first is about a girl from his youth named Michaeline, which we'll get into that maybe a little bit more later, then his friend Brett, and then his grandma. And the way that he uses similar, like, vocal patterns and structures, and how he's designing these different sections, really it becomes poetic. I mean, even though he's not designing it to be poetic, and the words that he's saying don't necessarily rhyme or have a meter like you would expect out of any poeticism, it becomes poetic by how he's presenting
Another great example of that is a track right before it, Richard Ramirez Died Today of Natural Causes. And that song, it took me a couple listens to understand what he was doing with the lyrics, but it's really brilliant, because what he does is he talks about the serial killer Richard Ramirez and how he died of natural causes, and he juxtaposes that with all these stories about people who died too young and himself getting old, and you think about it, and he doesn't have to spell it out for you, and that's the genius of it, but it forces you to think, wow, this serial killer is able to go through life and then just die of natural causes when there's so much trouble in the world and people dying too young of unnatural causes.
Right.
And where is the fairness in that?
Right, absolutely.
And he doesn't have to spell it out for you as I just did, but he just leads you there, and it's so elegant.
Yeah, you draw your own conclusions from it, but yet somehow with the way he constructs and delivers his stories, everyone, I think, draws similar conclusions when listening to these tracks. Now, what blew me away, what initially hooked me in, is how he opened up this record. Now, on Velocities of Music, Tom, you and I talk all the time about warrant.
Yeah.
An artist needs to establish warrant. If you don't do that, if you don't give your listener a thesis statement or a reason to give any shits about your album, then you're never going to emotionally get them. And the thing about Benji is that Mark actually goes out of his way to establish an emotional connection with you right away. It almost is like he starts it off with a mystery. His second cousin, Carissa, which is the name of the track, died taking out the trash. And he tells you this story about how this happened, but the thing is that he doesn't know a lot about it. He's going out to a funeral, he's flying to Ohio, and he goes into these, the thing about Mark's lyrics is that he goes into these insane amount of details about aerosol cans, and later on he talks about
His
several
uncle.
his uncle, several references to Panera Bread, actually giving details about the things that he's talking about, which makes it seem more real. It gives his lyrics a sense of realism, a texture that your mind can feel and relate to, and that sense of warrant brings you in, and it makes it applicable to you in your life. Carissa, it's a sad story about a second cousin who he didn't know very well, dies. She had kids and everything, but what's crazy is his uncle, who was her grandfather, also died in a fire
in his yard.
And it references that track, which is track 3, Truck Driver. So you have one thing that just blows my mind when artists do this, is when they create these really deep tracks with great lyrics, and the lyrics reference other tracks, because the full circleness, the circle jerk of that album just drives me, it just gives me shivers, because it's true craft. That shows this is art, and this is what he does, and the way he does it is so freaking elegant.
And I said the same thing about Anthony Johnson's I Am a Bird Now. When an artist is able to make you care about something that you have no connection to, you don't know this guy. Well, I don't know, maybe you do. I sure as hell don't. I didn't know his second cousin, you probably
or
didn't,
his uncle.
But he makes you care. He makes you care. And when music is able to do that, it is when it transcends just being music, just being entertainment. It is when it is about human connection and making people relate with each other. And music is able to do that in a way that I feel other art forms simply aren't. And Benji is an exemplary statement towards that. It is just incredible. Oh my God, Jim Wise, this story there about how he mercy killed his wife and now he's going on trial.
Well, because he tried to commit suicide and failed.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like you're reading this newspaper, but it's told by he and his dad went to visit this guy and who's under house arrest for trying to kill himself. Can't destroy government property. It's heartwarming. I mean, it's what it is. Now, it would be wrong for us to not, sum up the lyrical theme of this record as mortality. I mean, there's lots of songs about family members of Mark's that have died. There's there's a track about Newtown, Connecticut, Jim Wise, mercy killing his wife. Richard Ramirez was a serial killer. In Michaeline, his friend Brett died. There's lots of themes about death in this record. But I think that it's if that's all you take away from this is it's about a bunch of sad songs about death, you're really not looking into this. I mean, it's much more than that, because death is something. I mean, this guy is 47 years old at the time he released Benji. At 47, you're at the age where your parents, if they're still alive, they're getting pretty old.
Which he addresses.
Right, which he addresses. He has a track for his mom and a track about his dad on this record. And that's my point. This is more about family than it is death. It's more about dealing with how you progress through life and how you can have these intense relationships with people that are family members you may not even barely know, but they still play these roles in your life. And the way he describes that and puts words and music to it, it's ear. I'm getting goosebumps freaking talking about it.
It's kind of like in Flaming Lips, do you realize everyone you know someday will die?
Yeah.
And he's just addressing that, straightforward, being honest with the listener. And where I think the real beauty of this album is, to kind of sum it up for myself, is that he takes all these very heavy-hitting, very emotionally taxing stories from his own life, and you get to the end and you think, it's almost depressing. I don't want to say it's depressing because I think that puts this album in a bad light, but it's very heavy. And you just think, wow, how can someone go through life and handle all this stuff? And then you get to the last track, Ben's My Friend, which while I think on its own isn't the best track on the album, I think it's the key to unlocking the whole point of this album. That song is much more optimistic. He focuses a lot more on just the everyday, kind of maybe bland aspects of his life, but those are the things that make life also. And that's when you as the listener realize that he wasn't just singing about himself and his own experiences throughout this album. All those tough times, all those heavy moments that he addresses are things that we all go through.
Right.
They're things that we all go through. And yeah, if you take all those moments of an entire lifetime and sum them up in a 60-minute record, it's going to be pretty heavy. But really, the beauty of it is that we all go through that and we all get through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And furthermore, I mean, while the lyrical subject matter is quite heavy, he's using these really beautiful acoustic guitar fingerings that I think just the contrast, the cathartic contrast there is just incredible. And that is what is truly incredible about this is you'll listen to this album, especially like I listened to this, like I went for a run this morning and listened to this album. These songs are going to be haunting me all day long. I have Michaeline in my head right now, but like throughout the day I'm going to get different tracks from Benji in my head, and they're not going to be able to leave, and then I'm going to be reciting these lyrics, these themes in my head with those really beautiful guitar lines, and it's incredibly moving.
These songs have profoundly impacted just my everyday mood for the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And God, when music is able to do that it just doesn't get much better than that. You know?
I feel like we could talk another 20 minutes about tracks. I mean,
we should wrap it up.
We really didn't even talk about Truck Driver, or I watched the film The Song Remains the Same, which have huge lyrical implications in the album. Really, this album it's a damn gift. I mean, it's something that you guys need to go out and listen to and really experience, because very few albums, I mean, we've reviewed well over 600, 700 albums. So we did a shitload of albums. We reviewed a shitload of albums. And very few have moved us the way that Benji did. And that's saying something. So if you guys would please go out, we'd love to talk to you about this. I'm going to go 95.
I'm going 95.
Likely I'm going to keep listening to this all year long. Probably go up to 100.
Going to be our best album of the year. It'll be hard to beat.
It's going to be hard to beat, and we'll probably increase our score over time like we normally do. But if you guys have any comments or want to talk about some of these lyrics, or like found any of these songs particularly inspirational or meaningful, we'd love to hear about it. Leave us a comment at www.velocitiesandmusic.com or youtube.com/velocitiesandmusic. As always, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and let us know what albums you'd like us to review on this channel. Benji, one of the few reasons we even looked at this album was it was a request. So thank you guys for participating. You guys are what makes Velocities and Music hummer. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, Velocities and Music, moving music critique forward.
My dad said, son, everyone's different. You gotta love them all equally.